gentlemen, right now we're going to bring to the stage the young man who wrote just about all of Bobby Blue Bland's first hit records. He wrote tunes such as Don't Cry No More, I Pity the Fool, Yield Not to Temptation, Further On Up the Road, Cry, 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 If I Don't Get Involved. Ladies and gentlemen, how about it? Let's hear it for Houston on Joe Medwick. Wipe away your tears, baby. Joe's here.
Good evening. I am your host this week of Houston's Public Affairs Public Access Show. I'm your host, Michelle DeSalle, and thank you for tuning in to our special, Joe Medwick, the man, the singer, and the writer. Thanks for tuning in. You are about to experience one of the great part of music history of Mr. Joe Medwick, a fellow Houstonian, also attended Jack Yates High School, and was a part of one of the biggest African-American music labels known as Peacock Records. And here with me tonight to help you find out about this legendary music artist is a great panelist of distinguished guests. Please allow me to introduce to you these wonderful people that will help you find out about the life and legacy of Mr. Joe Medwick. I have with me here Dr. Freddie Brown, and he is on-air personality at KTSU's The Choice, doing the blues plate, all the blues you can use. How are you tonight, Dr. Freddie Brown?
I'm fine, except it's your community station.
Your community
Heart
station.
and soul of Houston.
As we know it. All right. And we also have with us your wonderful vocalist, legend, living legend, Miss Tweed Smith. Thank you for being with us this evening. How are you?
I am wonderful, and it is my joy to be here. Much pleasure.
Wonderful. And I can't wait to introduce this fabulous man here, living legend as well, musician, guitarist. This is Mr. Milton Hopkins. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Wonderful. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And also we have with us tonight Mr. Roger Wood, the author of Down in Houston, Bio City Blues. Welcome and thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Great. Now, this is exciting for me because I've had the pleasure of playing this man's music, being on, you know, this is my buddy here. We both worked at the same radio station, and I've had the pleasure of playing Joe Medwick's music, and knowing that he was right here, raised in 3rd Ward, is just a beautiful part of our history. And I'd like to ask the panelists if they could share with us how they met Joe Medwick. Dr. Freddie Brown, could you give us a little insight on how you met Mr. Medwick?
Well, I met Mr. Medwick through his music before I actually met him.
Okay.
I played his records over the years by him and by the folks who sang his songs. Like I said, if I, like you mentioned, Bobby Bland, half the songs, his hits were written by Joe Medwick. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them were played by this gentleman sitting over here, Milton Hopkins, guitarist on a lot of those songs. I met Joe in 1989 when he came through the station. Mm-hmm. He had just did If I Don't Get Involved. Yeah. And he was with the Grady Gaines organization. Mm-hmm. And it's but to say that, well, it happens. The same time his came out, Bobby Bland's came out, and that's how history is made.
Indeed. Tweed, would you like to share with us about your experience?
Certainly. As Dr. Freddie Brown said, my experience in meeting the great Mr. Joe Medwick is that I was through his music. Mm-hmm. I'm born and raised in Houston also. Duke Peacock Records, Don Roby was legendary. All of the music that I was surrounded with was part of that. That was where most of the black artists at that time were being able to get their music out. So I heard all of the songs that preceded our conversation growing up. And as I began to be involved in being a recording artist myself, my interest and my curiosity about what really is going on around me in my city and with music drew me to learn more about Duke Peacock Records. I had the opportunity to work with a gentleman by the name of Calvin Owens, and he had ties with Duke Peacock Records, as you all around the panel know, and he enlightened me more about the great Mr. Joe. And I became intrigued with all of the wonderful things that he had done, but even more intrigued, why didn't he get the credit?
And we're going to definitely delve more into that, why didn't he get the credit, in just a little bit. Mr. Hopkins, being the prolific musician that you are still today, I mean, I even had the pleasure to hear you play just about a month ago, and it was a fabulous experience. I would like for you to share with our audience, what do you remember most about Joe, and what was it like, you know, being around him and playing with him?
He was, each time I was in his presence, it had to do with business.
Yes.
Right down to when he was first introduced to me in 1954 by Willie Mae Thornton, Willie Mae Hound Dog Thornton.
Yes.
He had a stack of papers in one hand and a beer in the other.
Okay.
And he was trying to get Willie Mae to sit down long enough to go through these songs so she could find if there was something that she could do.
Right.
And he was very business-like gentleman.
Well, that's a pretty interesting business tools. Beer in one hand and some music in the other. That'll get the job done. Right. All right. Most musicians that are coming through now, you know, they're coming, you know, out of fancy institutions and things like that, being formally trained and what have you. Do you know if Joe had any formal training in the music, or was it just natural born talent? What do you?
I think it was just natural born talent.
Just natural born talent.
He didn't know anything about music or whatever, but he did. He did know a good arrangement when he heard it.
Yes, yes. What do you call that? Having an ear for it?
Yes.
Awesome, great.
Apparently he was very prolific.
Yes.
Yeah, he had lyrics, and he heard it all at once, the music and the lyrics all at once when he got the revelation of the song. I too write similar to that, but I could feel it in the music that it just flowed in him.
Yes.
It was like breathing, and it was, thank God for him.
Tweet, I'm glad that you mentioned that. The personal struggles that a musician face. Growing up in the Third Ward area, can you tell me about the struggles of aspiring, you know, musicians and songwriters?
Sweetheart, I grew up in the Fifth Ward area.
In the Fifth Ward area.
And the Cashmere Garden area.
All right.
But our plights are very similar. I did directly out of high school enrolled at Texas Southern University.
Yes.
And shortly thereafter was put with Dr. Howard Harris, who saw and heard something in me.
Yes.
And he nurtured me through blues and jazz. But I as growing up, I never thought about getting paid for what was flowing through me.
Yes.
I never thought about that growing up.
Yes.
It was after I had already been thrust into being professional that I had to go back and learn about, oh, let me find out a little bit something about this business of this.
Right.
You know, I'm having a great time, but I gotta get paid. So that was my experience.
Yes, yes.
And surely it's the same for young musicians, even though they have more access to which we did not have at the time. They can look up what their rights are. They can find out how to get a song right and publishing and things that are important in music. But when I came along, it was something that was not really shared with the artists, because they didn't want you knowing nothing about that. They just want you to keep on singing and having a good time and writing and, you know, just putting the music there.
Right.
And they would give you what they wanted you to have. But there were some artists, thank God for those artists, that stood up and said, wait a minute, I had more to do with this than what you're giving me credit for.
And having said that, Roger, you have written about some of the greatest talents of our time here in the Houston area. And you've had several accounts of situations like that. Could you share with us of some of the insight that you wrote in your book about Mr. Joe Medwick?
Yes, unlike these folks, I never actually got to meet Joe Medwick in person. But I learned about him first through a man who was profoundly important to me, a musician that I bet all these folks knew, named Teddy Reynolds. Teddy Reynolds and Joe Medwick were both born in 1931 in Third Ward, within a few blocks of each other. They knew each other growing up. And I first interviewed Teddy Reynolds in 93 or 94, which was shortly after Joe Medwick had passed. He passed away in 92. And Teddy would describe to me his involvement as kind of Joe Medwick's musical assistant in coming up with song ideas that Medwick would sell to, often to Don Roby, who was the owner, the entrepreneur who founded first the Peacock label in Houston in '49, and then acquired from Memphis the Duke label and brought it down here and created an empire. And that was the first I learned about him. And Teddy talked about Joe. You know, Joe didn't play a musical instrument. But Teddy talked about him as a poet who, he said there was this place in Third Ward, the old original Shady's Playhouse. I bet you remember that, Mr. Hopkins.
Yes, sir.
And this was a music venue that was open 7 days a week, and it had, they called it a motel, but it was 12 little shotgun shacks behind it that the proprietor also owned. And a lot of the musicians that gigged there lived in those shacks. Shotgun shacks. No disrespect intended. We call them shotgun shacks. You know what I'm talking about. And Teddy was staying there. And he said Joe Medwick, I don't know if Mr. Medwick was actually staying there or not, but said during the day when the musicians were hanging around, Teddy would be on this upright piano and they're playing around, you know, and Medwick would be sitting at a table with a Big Chief note tablet. And us older folks remember those from grade school.
Yes, we do.
And he said he had, you know, that rough paper, that cheap paper. But he said he kept a Big Chief note tablet and a pencil. And said he would take a phrase. He'd hear someone turn a phrase or something, and he would jot stuff down, and he would work song ideas out of it. And then Teddy wasn't really a songwriter, but he had a good ear for music. And then Joe would kind of like write the lyrics first, and then he would kind of start singing the melody and get Teddy to kind of play along with it. And if it started coming together, and you talk about that connection between Third Ward and Fifth Ward, because Shady's was in Third Ward, and the Duke Peacock office was up in Fifth Ward at 2809 Erastus Street. And Teddy said that they would be broke, and they would bum bus fare from some of the other musicians, jump on that bus, go up to Fifth Ward, get to the Peacock office, where they would often have to wait a long time. And this was Roby's strategy, I've learned from folks told me. He'd make these musicians wait because he knew they wanted to sell a song and he knew they wanted cash. And the longer they waited, the more they were ready to just sell that song and get out of there. And then at some point he would come out and Teddy would play and Joe Medwick would sing and they would listen. And he would buy the songs on the spot for cash. And this was early in the career, and a lot of those songs, when they got registered for copyright, they were registered under the name, originally Don Roby, which was the man's real name, and then he took some criticism for that, and so he adopted an alias. His middle name was Diedrich, and his wife's maiden name was Malone, so he invented a man that didn't exist, Diedrich Malone. And to this day, you can look on a lot of great
It's there.
R&B and blues records from the 50s and 60s and see Dee Malone credited as the writer.
That's right.
And these songs would get turned into you know, Joe Scott and others that worked for Duke and Peacock would make big arrangements out of them. But it would begin at a place like Shady's Playhouse or someplace with a Big Chief tablet and Joe Medwick writing words and starting to hear a melody in his head. And it might not have always been Teddy Reynolds, but finding a musician that he could kind of hum it or sing it and get them to kind of kick in with it and get an idea.
Well, this makes for interesting history lessons, doesn't it? But it also is a testament of making certain that in today's music industry that we learn the business of music. Isn't that correct? Well, thank you for that. You are a walking history book.
Well, thank you. I've had the pleasure to learn from people like Teddy Reynolds and Milton Hopkins. You know, most of what I know I've learned from oral history of these musicians who want to tell their stories.
Absolutely.
And then from looking at the fine print on those old records.
One thing that I've noticed, and people give rap a bad name, but these artists, when they came into the business, not just rapping. And a lot of artists are getting paid now because of their demanding their rights and their contracts before going into the studio and before going on stage. Because I'm sure that Mr. Rock can tell you, Tweet can tell you also, back in the 50s and 60s, you got robbed.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Excuse the expression, but you got robbed.
Well,
no doubt.
We do understand.
Even in today's time, I can speak personally. When I first went into major recording and went into the studio with a world-renowned group, and they had the track, and we were all putting lyrics down and making the song come together. And when it came out, everybody was credited with Tweed Smith. So I, at that point, had to obtain an attorney, get my writer's rights, but it happened because I was aware.
And Tweed, you were singing with the group War, correct?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
We want to talk about now the Joe Medwick, the singer. We know that, you know, he was doing some creative stuff with his, you know, Big Chief pad and all of that. But I want to talk about the songs, you know, and there were several songs that have appeared on soundtracks, you know, that's been used by independent films, and he was actually the vocals on those particular soundtracks, which was amazing. Even though we know that there was a lot of songs that he wrote and someone else, you know, got the credit for it, but these soundtracks, he was actually the vocals on it. Dr. Freddie Brown, how did artists happen to be able to get their music played back in the 50s?
First thing I want to say, Joe Medwick was as fine a soul singer as anybody who's ever stepped in front of the mic.
Wow.
You know, why he wasn't bigger, I don't know, but that's part of the business too. But to get your music played, it's an oversimplification, but you got to hang out.
You got to hang out, okay?
You got to hang out.
And what does that mean exactly, Dr. Brown?
You got to hang around radio stations. You got to hang around recording studios. You got to be around where people play records on the radio. In my case, I'll say for myself, if you want your record played on my show, then you got to hand me that record.
Okay.
Because if you send it to the station, it'll get played, but it may be 3 months
That's right.
before it gets to me.
I see.
So for the young folks, that's what they do. When they get the record, it comes straight to the station.
Okay.
Or their manager, somebody brings that record to the person who's going to actually play the record.
Mr. Hopkins, why don't you shed some light on how the records got played back then?
Well, there was a thing called payola.
Okay, all right.
They would bring the record and a $100 bill.
Okay.
And whoever he might be would go back to his station, and I will rest for sure. If he's on an hour, he's going to play that record 2 or 3 times.
Well, I'll say.
This is the truth.
That's some Good information
And that was a sure way to get it
to
played.
get it played.
A lot of great jocks lost their jobs.
Oh, the payola.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Because of the payola.
Right.
True.
Yes.
One thing I'd point out too, while Joe Medwick is the name we mainly know this individual by, and it's the name we're using tonight, you know, his birth name was Medwick VC.
Yes.
Joe Medwick was a famous baseball player for the St. Louis Cardinals. And so young kids at Yates and stuff, they'd say, "Hey, Joe Medwick,"
Right.
and then it kind of became his name.
Right, right.
But I would say when we talk about Joe Medwick recordings, you actually have. There's many songs he helped create that other people recorded, but when he recorded under the name Joe Medwick. He recorded under the name Joe VZ,
Right.
and he even recorded under the name Joe Melvin.
Right.
And so there's a bunch of records out there with different names on them that are all his voice and his material and his work in the studio.
Great information. How has the music business changed from the 50s until present day? Tweed, what do you think about that?
Well, let me say, I'm a child of the 50s.
Yes.
And music, I was told by my mother that I came into the world with a song. But I can say from my experience as to when I began to understand that the change is not so much.
Okay.
Because it still takes the same ingredients to have good music.
Okay. All right.
Where the change is in the the exposure of it.
Yeah.
Whereas back in the day, you had to have something when you went out to shop, you had to have something. Today, so many with something that it's like you throw it up, and then the lucky ones stick, or the ones that have the capital to put into it.
I see.
We had a such thing as my friend Milton just said, the payola made a lot of hits.
Yeah.
The payola made a lot of hits because repetition in hearing a song will make your mind stay with that song.
Okay.
But back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, music was the center.
Yes.
Not so much arrangements or beats, but it was the music.
Music.
And it took, as Roger spoke to me earlier, said it was a team effort. And it's always should be that way with music.
Mr. Hopkins, could you talk to me about the creative process? Now, you have played with some phenomenal musicians. Talk about the creativity that goes into putting together music.
It takes a lot of everything
A lot
that you know about music
Yes.
and experience that you had in such. And nothing is new. You have to put your mind to work and go back just as far as you can and try to remember this, that, or the other, and
Yes.
see where it will fit into your project, whatever you're doing.
Okay.
And that's the way it was for most of us. Yeah.
And being the fact, yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Dr.
When
Brown.
you ask for how the music has changed, the biggest change in music has been the technology, the sound itself.
Yes.
The other change is that back when Tweed and Milton and them started, there wasn't the same conglomerate, there wasn't the same number of artists. Now everybody with a laptop is a DJ or a musical artist.
Yeah.
You know, there were places that you could go practice your art. I'm originally from New York. Every corner had a little cabaret with a 2 or 3 piece band or 5 piece band that worked every weekend. Now, you can leave here, you're here in Houston, you can leave out here on a Friday night and can't find a dozen places with live music. And that's all genres.
So when
See, so the kids now, like I said earlier, they're going from music lessons to the studio or to the stage. And it's not the same.
So when you mentioned that Mr. Medwick was able to hone his craft at Shady's Playhouse, right? So those places like that are very important for musicians. You agree?
Yeah, but like I said before, but there was a dozen places like Shady back then.
Right, right.
There isn't now.
It's missing now.
You know, I think Dr. Brown's point about the technology is really crucial to the Joe Medwick story too,
Yes.
because, you know, a person, any person with musical talent, if you wanted to get it out there, you had to go to a record company.
Yes.
Where you had not just the ability to press records, to record and press records, but at Peacock you had someone like Joe Scott on the staff, because in those days to copyright music you had to have a musical transcription to send to Washington, D.C. And so a guy like Teddy Reynolds, who was a great musician but did not read music really,
Right.
and certainly couldn't transcribe music,
Right.
you had to have the Joe Scott to write it down. Now, years later, by the time we get into the 70s or so, they made it where you could just do whatever you did on a cassette and send it into Washington, D.C. You didn't have to transcribe it.
I see.
If they'd had cassette recorders, cheap cassette recorders around Shady's Playhouse back in the 1950s, and if these guys had understood how the process worked, you know, they still would have had to go through the gatekeeper to go to Roby or someone to record it and get it out there, but they would have been able to at least, but you know, the oral history, not just from Teddy Reynolds, but that I've read from interviews Joe Medwick did with other people, and I say this with all respect, they were young men living for the moment, and Medwick says he didn't want some contract where this song might or might not get recorded and might or might not a year or two from now result in some mailbox money. He needed to pay the rent this week.
Right.
And so in an interview that Medwick did with the Houston Chronicle not long before he died, he said, don't blame Don Roby. He took advantage of us, but we allowed him to because we wanted that cash right now.
Right.
That's what we wanted.
Right.
And I think there's a big lesson there that goes beyond music about, you know, the short-term reward versus the investment in the long-term reward, and really understanding the payoff. And by the time Mr. Medwick was in his later years, he understood all that. And he realized as a young man, I was foolish because I was living for the moment and having my fun. And when we ran out of money, I mean, this is what Teddy told me. When they were living at Shady's Playhouse and hanging around, so when they ran out of money, they'd make up a song and go sell it. They had some cash.
Right.
And they were happy to have it.
Exactly.
And so, you know, that inability to, Joe Medwick, if he had known, he could have copyrighted his lyrics if he'd known how to send off the right form to Washington, D.C., but the idea that the music had to be transcribed to be copywritten as music, that all went through the studio and through, you know, the trained people like Joe Scott, who could hear something and immediately write a transcription of it.
Right. Thanks for that insight. Tweed, talk to me about, and share the audience, were there contracts offered? Were there royalties offered? And if they were, how were they negotiated then?
Yes, there were some artists that were presented with contracts, but usually the contract would be what we call lopsided.
Okay.
It would be more for the producers and the managers than for the artists. They may deal on the point system where you get so many points on a record in royalties, and there were many ways, but I found out really early about something called the poor man's copyright, where you could put your music, mail it to yourself, never open it up, keep it, and if ever there's a question, then that's your resolve to have that. And a lot of artists use that tool. Many artists use that tool for lack of finance, and other things. Right. But it was a legal tool, and I was glad to learn of it when I did.
Of course, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. We want to talk about, we've touched on it several times, but to just delve over into the writing aspect of Joe Medwick. Farther on up the road, it's a classic, even to this day. The song was re-recorded by greats like Eric Clapton and performed by many legends. Enlighten us on how Joe Medwick would have write a song. You mentioned about the Big Chief pad, but I've heard that he wrote music on cigarette paper and things of that nature. Talk to us about that.
Well, I know
Mr. Hopkins, if you will.
You know, every time I saw Joe, he had a handful of papers, like I said a while ago.
Yes.
And I never saw him write a song on a cigarette paper, but I'm almost sure it happened.
Well, someone you knew, you remember Mr. Jerry Lightfoot?
Yes, I remember.
He told me the story about Medwick taking a cigarette pack, and they were down to the last smoke. Took the cigarette out, tore the pack, opened it, and flattened out, and on the inside of the pack,
Wow.
was like scribbling down. And I think whether it's poets or musicians or other kind of writers, there's an element of writing words that's like music, and that it's the sound of something. And he said what Medwick would do, you'd be in a bar, be in a bunch of guys hanging out, and someone would just turn a phrase that had a certain snazz to it. You know, it just sounded cool.
And he'd get inspiration.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, before you accuse me, take a look at yourself.
Right.
And he'd, you know, and he'd jot that down,
Right.
and he might not write the song right then, but he
Yes.
would hear that phrase
Right.
that it would ring in his ear like a good guitar tone, like that sounds good.
Yes.
And that phrase would become the seed that he would later expand on that Big Chief tablet. To make something happen. Lightfoot said in the Houston Chronicle when Medwick died, he said he could pull songs out of the air, and he was talking about the lyrics, that his ability, and I think that's what part he was getting at. He would hear cats talking and hear a phrase and kind of pull it out of the air and write it down, and before you know it, it's the lyrics to a song.
That's amazing, and good nuggets for aspiring writers and things like that, you know, that are tuning in. You know, just be inspired. Anything can inspire you to write a good song or, you know, a good poem or something like that. Thanks for sharing that, Mr. Wood. Milton, was Joe able to revive his career at any point that you know of?
I think the time that he spent with Grady, that was a try at it.
Okay.
And he I think possibly he would have been successful.
Yeah, he's
But he
taking on a
didn't-
new
he
manager too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was his attempt before his death in '92 is when he worked with Grady. Amazing. Yes.
Yeah, in 1989, I believe was the year Grady, thanks in part to Mr. Milton Hopkins, who got Grady back on stage again over at
Yeah.
Etta's Lounge over there on Scott Street.
Yes.
Because Grady,
Every Sunday.
for the audience that doesn't know, Grady Gaines was playing with Little Richard back in the 50s and all kinds of stuff. So was Milton Hopkins, by the way. Little Willie John, all these folks
Sam
touring
Cooke.
all over North America and beyond. But Grady Gaines, the great saxophone player and band leader, had retired from music and was working up at Intercontinental Airport, and Mr. Hopkins got him back involved, and Grady's comeback started. And in '89, a label based in New Orleans called Blacktop Records cut a record with Grady Gaines and his brother Roy Gaines on guitar, and Clarence Holloman on guitar, and Teddy Reynolds on keys, Big Robert Smith on vocals, and Joe Medwick on vocals. Joe Medwick wrote 4 of the songs. He sang 3 of them, and one of them he co-wrote with Grady, and that's that song "I've Been Out There," which, by the way, became the title of Grady's autobiography.
Wow.
That was published by Texas A&M University Press some years ago. And it's the song where Grady's kind of he told Joe Medwick, I've been out there with Little Richard, I've been out there, he started naming out, and Joe Medwick turned that into a poem that became the lyrics to a song. But the thing I really enjoyed about that Grady record too was Joe's voice, because, you know, Dr. Brown mentioned he was a great soul singer. He had the capacity to go deep.
Yes. Right.
You know, there's some soul singers that can go high and hit that spot.
Yes.
This guy could go deep and hit it.
Yes.
And that kind of, you know, that he brought this kind of basso profundo element to some soul singing that I really enjoy when I hear it on recordings.
Well, we know that he wrote some great songs, and I've had plenty of people calling into my show wanting to hear certain songs, but Joe wrote I I Don't Want No Woman. He wrote I Pity the Fool, Cry, 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 and Turn Your Love Light On. And one of the ones that they would always want to hear too is Barefootin'. If you could tell me in about a minute or so, what would you say that Joe's musical legacy was, Mr. Hopkins?
I would say Joe wanted to be heard, and he would like to be as big a artist as he could get to be.
Yes.
He wanted to be successful. That was the second time he came around with that last outing with Grady Gaines.
Yes.
He was shooting for the stars.
Yes. Tweed, would you share?
Just one question, one correction though. Joe didn't write Barefootin'.
No.
No, I said that that's what they would request him to
okay, fine.
and me to play.
That was
yes.
Bobby Paul.
Yes. Tweed, what would you say his legacy was?
Just as being a phenomenal songwriter, interpretation of an idea in a song. I haven't experienced in lyrics, and I'm a lyricist myself. I love lyrics, and most vocalists do. Right. And to hear him put that story together in a song and make it all come together out of, as Roger shared with us, out of an idea, just coming out of your hat, out of the air. But it's not out of the air. It's creativity from the creator.
Yes.
And it's a part, it makes you have something special, and Joe had it. Very special.
Thank you. Dr. Freddie Brown, what would you say Joe's legacy was?
His legacy was his music. I mean, every time you hear one of his songs, it hits you somewhere. Joe wrote about life. The last song, the one we talked about before, If I Don't Get Involved. I can't get hurt if I don't get involved. That's hitting you where you live.
Right. Absolutely. And Mr. Wood, if you could give us a minute or two, what would you say that Joe's legacy was with talking about the man, the singer, and the writer?
Well, you know, I'm going to go back to the words because his impact on pop culture extends beyond the people that recorded the lyrics he wrote. If I take one example, he wrote a song called I Pity the Fool. Bobby Bland had a great record called I Pity the Fool. And then a decade or two later, there's this guy named Mr. T that's on a show called The A-Team on TV, and his catchphrase was, I pity the fool. And so here, you've got a guy that came up with this phrase that is the germ for a song that gets pulled into television popular culture, and you had boys running around America going, I pity the fool that will mess with me, you know? And it was that ability to find in just the common words of people talking a phrase that had that power to it.
That catchphrase, yes.
I need to take a break.
The power of
Just unhook it and go if you need to.
the African American label. You talk about Duke Peacock, and it was important for us to have, for the artists to have a place to go and to record. So could you talk to us a little bit about the label?
I wish I could.
Well, when
I came to Houston, the label had been defunct for a few years. I've heard about it, I know about the music, and everything I know about Don Roby is hearsay for me. I never met the man, so I don't want to sit here and start rumors or repeat them.
Well, Tweet, could you shed some light on it?
My experience with Don Roby, Peacock, Duke Records, like I said, I grew up in Fifth Ward. And aspiring vocalists, I wanted to get in those doors. It was not for me at that time. But I did get the experience of being around the musicians. It was the musicians that that it intrigued me with the happenings of recording. And back then, everything was big and gawky, and just to be able to see inside of a studio, I thought I had, of course, gone to heaven. To just see inside. And at that time, it was in this last day when I got a chance to see it. But I remember, like I said, I worked for some years with an artist by the name of Calvin Owens, who knew Joe and told me the stories of how the music was created and how it was publicized, and it wasn't always, when it got to the public, it was not always the way it began. A lot of the team members were not credited, just the one that made the slam dunk, or the one that had the ball in his hand when he scored or got the attention.
Right.
So Duke Peacock Records is still big in my music world because all the hits that put ideas in my head.
Yes, and it's amazing that, you know, we have that cornerstone coming right out of Houston. Could you shed some light on that, Mr. Wood?
Yeah,
for us?
this amazing Houstonian named Don Diedrich Roby. He was born here in 1903, and he passed away here in 1975.
Right.
You know, we mainly talk about Duke and Peacock because that was where Peacock originally was recording blues and gospel. And then Duke was big on blues and early classic R&B.
Right.
But he actually had a total of 5 labels there. He had the Songbird label. He moved the gospel to that. And Roby in gospel recorded the Dixie Hummingbirds, the Blind Boys of Alabama. I mean, all the big ones, the Mighty Clouds of Joy. He also developed the Sure Shot label and the Backbeat label. And he had all kinds of pop material going on. and from 49, when he founded Peacock, which, by the way, was named after his nightclub, the Bronze Peacock nightclub, located up in the 5th Ward area. He started with Peacock, he added Duke. He sold, in 73 is when he more or less retired from the business. And he took all of his holdings, all of the masters, all of the songs that he technically owned because he had bought them from people like Joe Medwick.
Right.
And he sold all that as one big package to ABC Dunhill in Los Angeles, which later was purchased by MCA. And so if you find old Duke Peacock albums, LPs that were issued on CDs in the 90s, they're on MCA.
Right.
Yes, they are.
But that material has lived on as classic recordings. I mean, some people look for the old vinyl. Some of us are into those kind of antique relics, and some people just know it through it being reissued in digital format. But Roby built quite an empire and across those 5 labels. And part of what that did, imagine being a young person in a city where the largest African-American owned music business of the 50s is based. And I say African-American owned because there were people recording blues records in those days, but the Chess Brothers in Chicago, they weren't African-American. The Bahari Brothers in LA weren't African-American. The Mesner Brothers in LA weren't African-American. Right. Don Roby was an African-American man, and Nelson George called Don Roby a big fish in a small pond because he wasn't in New York or LA or Chicago. He was in Houston. But being not in those 3 other major cities gave Roby a chance to kind of have his own empire, and I think it had a huge impact on local talent.
Absolutely, but it was so much talent here, and that was the most amazing thing, is that artists like Joe Medwick had a home, and that we could absolutely get to enjoy the fruits of, you know, their labors and their creativity. So thank you. We are now going to get a chance to interview with Mr. Joe Medwick's daughter, Miss Loretta, and we'll have a few minutes to get her prepared and ready, and we'll talk to her because now they have started, you know, the reason why we're here tonight is because of the Joe Medwick VC Foundation. And so we're excited about that, and we're here because she has put together the foundation for her father, and so that other aspiring musicians can, come along. So we're truly excited about that, and I thank you, all of you, for all of your insight on the life and legacy of Mr. Medwick. This has been a treat for me, and I'm certain that the audience are enjoying, getting this good history lesson, and it awakens, young artists to find out these great nuggets of history about, legends like Mr. Medwick. So I thank you so much, Mr. Woods and Mr. Hopkins, Tweed, and Dr. Freddie Brown. This has been
my pleasure.
Wonderful. So we're getting ready to go into the next segment and just get a chance to talk to Miss Loretta. So thank you all so much, and we appreciate it. So thanks for tuning in, and we are going to get a chance to speak with Hello and welcome back to Public Affairs, Public Access. We are now going to have the privilege of talking to Mr. Joe Medwick's daughter, Miss Loretta Bradnax. How are you, Loretta?
I'm great. Thank you for asking.
Well, this has not happened overnight. This has been a long time coming. And I want you to tell me, how do you feel at this moment?
Oh my God, I am in total awe. And just all of the information that I gathered and some of the things I really didn't know about, and they were so interesting. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Joe, you had it like that. So, I mean, it's like you said, it's been not a trip, it's been a journey. Yes. And it's been a great journey. And it's just breathtaking. It's just breathtaking.
So now that we know how giddy you feel about all of the, the great things that, we were able to discuss here on the panel, you started a foundation for your father. Tell us about the Joe Medwick VC Foundation.
Well, the Joe Medwick VC Foundation, it is actually to assist other artists, upcoming artists, or just anyone in the area of music, musicians, writers. Mm-hmm. And what we'd like to do with the mission is assist those right at this First Avenue, just assist them with those who have encountered major setbacks from illnesses, chronic illnesses, and they're no longer able to assist themselves or help their dependents. And that kind of happened to my father. You know, a lot of people may not know that he had cancer, and so his career actually declined, and he was no longer able to help himself. So those are some of the things I thought about when I had the foundation in mind. I thought, oh my God, those things happen to musicians. What do you do? Because most musicians from the beginning, they just don't get a lot of work that you know, you would get if you were already. You have to establish yourself legendary, but it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but it will come with hard work.
So with that mission statement, I think that that's very powerful, that a part of your mission statement is to assist, you know, musicians when they are, you know, going through health issues or transitioning and whatever. So is there anything in place for young aspiring musicians for the organization, Loretta?
Yes, I am. Well, let me take that back. At this moment, there is nothing in place directly, but in the upcoming months or so, I plan to have some things that will assist our younger, inspiring artists. And some of those things I would love to recreate a Shady's Playhouse somewhere where they can go and you know, hone their crafts. Also, I'd like to get some discounted studio time if possible, and just a lot of, I mean, my mind is just so vivid right now. I just feel like it's unlimited, some of the things that we could do with the foundation.
Right. I can recall, you know, you and I, you know, this isn't just haphazard. You and I, we've been friends for almost 20 years, and I've, you know, walked through these processes with you of trying to get, even though we're talking about assisting musicians once they've been down on their luck or illness and everything, but you were having the challenge of trying to get rights to your father's music, and a lot of musicians have dealt with that. Why don't you, you know, walk us through that process a little bit?
I would say, from my experience with my father, I would try and get all of that from the initial stage, because it gets kind of difficult who wrote what. And you know, and if you don't have any proof, I think it was Miss Smith had mentioned that on the panel, you have to you pretty much have to dot all of your, you dot your I's, you cross your T's, and you do all of those things in hopes to be able to own your music and claim it. Because there are lots of people, not everyone, but there are artists out there who, you know, their work, they don't know a lot of these things. So I'm hoping that they would be watching the show tonight and they could learn from these lovely legends. I mean, you, as the audience, I'm hoping the viewers could tell, these people know their stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm a novice, but they know their stuff. I'm like, so, I mean, I was just amazed at some of the things that they knew, and it's still learning. I'm in a learning process as well, but I love it, every minute of it.
Well, I have to say this, and anybody that's watching on that's a parent or whatever, this is a big deal that you are carrying your father's legacy on, and we're still talking about him even now. So what would you say? This is some kind of labor of love that you've embarked upon.
Oh, definitely,
Loretta.
Labor of love. That explains it.
Yes.
Labor of love. That's exactly what it is. That's
Yes.
a great description.
Right, because there's been some dark moments.
Oh my God, it has there from just a lot of different things. I'm like, I mean, it's still not resolved.
Right.
Because a lot of things are not resolved, and they may not ever get resolved. So, you know, some things you just kind of, you let them be.
Yeah.
You know, and you take it from there and try and learn from, not make some of the same mistakes, you know. And, you know, you just kind of, it's a process where you're gonna go through and experience pitfalls.
Yes.
No matter what, whether you're a musician, an artist, an attorney, or a physician, it just happens.
Right.
So you learn as much as you can from, you can watch, I mean, from me, I learned from other people's mistakes, you know, them like thinking, oh God, that's not something I want to do. And you know, I pray that that's something I don't end up. I would hate for my hard-earned work to not get credit for it, you know? So, but again, it happens.
Right.
So that's why I said if you can get everything done initially, from the initial phase, then hopefully you will not have those pitfalls later on when your music becomes larger.
But when it's all said and done, the history, the pitfalls, the mistakes, I would believe that you are a pretty proud daughter to be the daughter of Joe Medwick and these great, you know, bodies of work. Yes?
Oh, yes, I am. Like I said, it's pretty hard to describe what I'm feeling now, you know. Later I may yell and scream outside, but
But we're going to try to keep it together right now, yes?
yeah, but I'm trying to keep it together right now. But it is, like I said, I've been working for years trying to get some things accomplished and just, you know, just so that he could get, establish his legacy and keep it there, you know, because, and I feel like it's going in the right direction.
Okay, yes.
Because one of the examples I feel like is going is because I'm thinking of a song that's written in 1950 something, 57 or so. I mean, it's been played by so many great artists. Like I said, Eric Clapton re-recorded it. He has a much more up-tempo.
Yeah.
And Bobby Bland's is just soul.
Right.
So, you know, it just depends. I like both.
Right.
I love both. Obviously, I love soul, but I like the up-tempo as well. So, and then there's many more artists in which I was shocked to find out that even the godfather of her soul, James Brown, he even liked that song, and he didn't re-record it, but he would use it a lot, as opposed to now Eric Clapton used it as a repertoire.
Okay, good information. Well, knowing that your father was so talented, well, were you a little chip off the old block? Did you pick up any of those talents, Miss Broadnax?
I think I'm creative.
Okay.
I know that I'm creative. That part I know.
So do you like the singing part or the writing part? What?
I like writing.
Okay.
Because I'm comfortable writing, and you know, but the thing about sometimes not being able to always talk about something, you can write something and still be heard.
Well, you start pulling those words out of the air, just like your dad did, and write us something really good. We want to thank each and every audience member. Thank you, Ms. Broadnax, for, you know, having this brainchild, and we thank you so much for tuning in to this week's Public Access, and thank you so much, and we'll see you back.
Thank you.